Hello everyone, we're going to cover now chapter number 3, which is the external assessment itself. So we're going to again go through this chapter in details. We're going to give you a bit of an introduction of what this chapter is all about, which talks about external audits. Now, what you need to be aware of is that why would an organization need to conduct external audits? Okay. Now, the purpose of that is actually identifies the opportunities and the threats from the external factors to the organization itself. Okay, that's really the main important points. And it basically, it really gives the opportunity for the organization to see what opportunities out there that can actually utilize, and to determine actually that threats could be near future threats or a future threat that it may actually affect the organization itself, and therefore conducting a strategy to overcome that threat itself. Now, the external forces that can be divided into 5 broad categories. So, which the first one is basically economic forces, okay, which is relating basically inflation, increase of interest rates, etc., etc. Now, the second force actually relates to social and cultural, environmental forces, okay, which we're going to go through into details on that. And the third force talks about political, government, and legal forces. And then the fourth force talks about your technological forces. And then the last force talks about your competitive forces. Now, the relationship between the key external forces and the organization may actually affect your competitors, may actually affect your suppliers, your creditors, your customers. So, for example, if we're talking about from an economic point of view, and if interest rate has actually increased, okay, or doubled up, and you're into a construction industry, then most likely people will not be able to purchase or get you to construct their own villa because the interest rate is too high. They won't be able to get a loan. So that is all an effect from that perspective. Okay. So the external forces affect the types of product developed and the nature of positioning and market segmentation strategies. So this is a very important point, that even though that these external forces are outside, but actually also may actually have a major impact on your market segmentation. Okay. Again, we gave you a simple example in relation to the construction company. Again, with external forces, it directly affects both suppliers and distributors, so both. Now, very important, by identifying and evaluating external opportunities and threats enables organizations to develop a clear mission, to design strategies to achieve the long-term objectives, and to develop policies to achieve the annual objectives itself. So this is a really important point that you need to be aware of. Why would you now conduct these external audits? Is because you may have to actually revise your mission statement that you've actually conducted earlier, which as we discussed in chapter 1 and 2. Now, because the threats has changed, or the opportunities has actually changed, now you need to make sure that you amend that mission statement itself to new opportunities or threats that's happening that you identified. Now, part of the external audit, what you can also do is you can actually conduct what I call the PESTEL analysis. And the PESTEL stands for your P, which is political factors, E, economic factors, S, which is social factors, and then T, your technological factors, and E, environmental, and L is your legal. And that's where the word PESTEL comes from. Now, why would you actually need to conduct that analysis? Is because part of your audits is you will conduct that analysis to determine the main opportunities and threats, part of these external factors itself. So it's a tool to understand the long-term trends and how it might impact the business itself. Okay, so it's a very important tool and a strategy that I would highly recommend for senior managers to actually utilize, and it's actually also part of your assessment even to conduct a PESTEL analysis itself. And what you're actually going through is through each factor being a political, how would that affect your organization itself. For example, in Australia, we have government bodies that actually change every 3 years. Now, having a whole new government, will that actually impact our industry, for example, again, from either a real estate or construction? And the answer is actually yes, because they may actually have a certain new rules with building new homes or new regulations, or even may actually have an impact on interest rates. Again, regarding with economics, they may also have issues on that as well. So what you need to do is actually go through each factor and how does that factor affect the business itself from what we call an opportunity and a threat. Okay, they're the only two things that you need to consider. Okay, now very important point here that I would like also to mention is our next slide with our political. When you're actually analysing your political perspective, you need to analyse your government policies in relation also to tax, labour laws, trade restrictions. So these are all comes back to political itself. Now, from economic point of view, you may also consider exchange rate, especially if you're actually doing export and imports. Also, you might consider the interest rate or inflation rates. Okay, so these are all part of your economics itself. Now, believe it or not, part of your economics actually talks about unemployment rate. Now, why would you put unemployment in economic? Because unemployment does have a major impact, because if you have a large percentage of people not working, well, obviously it will affect the economy. They're not going to be spending, okay? So keep that in mind. In relation to social, that talks about population growth, talks about career attitudes, health, lifestyle attitudes, and culture barriers itself. From a technology perspective, is that basically how technology actually evolved. Is AI, for example, will that affect your business? Is that actually a threat or maybe even an opportunity for your organization? From an environment-wise, you might consider actually the climate or climate change. You might talk about your weather or even actually the pressure itself. And then from a legal perspective, it talks about laws, employment laws, consumer laws, copyright laws, and safety laws. So all that comes back to the legal. So what you need to do is take each of these factors and go back to your organization and see, okay, will that factor affect my organization? Would that affect it from a threat, or would that create actually an opportunity? Now, our next slide, which is slide number 11, is actually the process of external audit. And there's actually 6 items I would like to talk to you about here now. Now, the first item actually involves as many managers and employees as possible. So when you conduct actually external audit, it's not just a one person conducting the audit itself, it's actually a team. And it's actually brainstorming, what will be the main threat from that particular factor, or what will be the main opportunities from that factor. So you need, as a manager, is to liaise with the senior managers and also to the foremen or center managers and discuss. Okay, well, this is actually in relation to the legal aspect. This new law, do you think this will be an opportunity or a threat? And maybe list a number of the threats, or maybe also list maybe the number of the opportunities, and brainstorm between your colleagues and see other ideas that might be coming up. Okay, so it's not just gets conducted just from one person. The other thing that you also need to consider, it gathers competitive intelligence, because when you're conducting external audits, you're going through the extent of research, getting what are the laws, or what is the economy change at the moment. So you're getting all this data that's coming through, and what you're doing, you're actually analysing and seeing how that data will affect your organisation. Now, you got to be specific, and you got to go, and whenever it's actually going back to your organisation, you got to be really specific. How will it affect your organisation itself? The third point that I would also like to outline here is actually the information about the social, demographic and cultural environment itself. Now, this is a really important point, because that information that you're going to be getting from your social or the cultural and the environment could be crucial. It could be also an opportunity for you to conduct a new product, okay, and that could be a great opportunity for the organisation to make great profits. Now, the other item that I would like to talk to you about is actually to monitor sources of information. So when you're doing your research, is that besides actually you going through and talking to your colleagues, but you need to obtain the latest articles, newspapers or government data that you can actually liaise and basically obtain that and analyse it and seeing how that will be a threat or opportunity for the organisation itself. And then the last item I would like to talk to you about is actually the suppliers, distributors, customers as sources of information. Now, do not underestimate, beside your organisation, but don't underestimate your, liaising with suppliers, liaising with your distributors, liaising with your customers, and getting their feedback on that itself. So this is really important, and that can be conducted by surveys, which is probably the most simplest way, a quick phone call, or even visiting that particular suppliers face-to-face and getting that information. So this is all part of obtaining information and data to analyse, what is the threats and what are the opportunities. Now, key external factors. Now, very important that I would like to outline here is that it may vary from time to time, and it may vary from industry to industry, okay? So external factors, so certain laws may affect certain industries a lot more than others. The economy, by having an increased interest rate, may affect industries a lot more than others, okay? So keep that in mind, okay? Now, the external factors, which is basically we're up to slide number 13, the most important key external factors should be communicated through the organisation itself. Now, very important key word here is that whatever that actually the factors were, it needs to be communicated throughout the organisation, because they need to be aware of is what are the threats and opportunities, and therefore everybody can actually work on the same goal itself. The strategy needs to be conducted and implemented for these identified most important opportunities and threats. Once that's been formulated, as I said, it needs to be communicated with your stakeholders, and everybody needs to making sure they're working through the same strategy itself. Now, we've given you some examples here in relation to economy forces. Again, one example I would like to actually outline here is consumption pattern. So a certain month of the year, you may see consumptions actually decreases or actually increases in certain products or certain customer service. Now, you need to be aware of that, and how is that going to be a threat or an opportunity for you that you can actually utilize. So you may say, well, look, in these months, I'm going to be making another product that is actually popular during these months, okay? So keep in mind, and that comes back to the economic forces itself. Now, in relation to the social and cultural aspects itself, new trends are creating different types of consumer, and consequently a need for different products, different services, and different strategies. So sometimes people will want to actually, over time, change the product itself. They don't want to use that product anymore, or the customers from that particular area, you've seen there's a decline for some reason, because in the area they could have had a high unemployment rate. So these all play a big role, part of your social, cultural, and demographic forces. Now, some of the consideration that you need to consider when you're actually conducting your research is that you may talk about and determine, in that area, what's the income capacity? Is it, say, for example, per year they're earning X amount of dollars or X amount of dirhams? You might talk about the government regulation in that particular state or country. You might talk about the lifestyle. Some people in some areas have a different lifestyle, even though it's in the same country itself. So these are all considerations that you need to consider when you're going through the social and cultural aspect of it. Now, the political part of it, this is really important because we don't just consider the countries itself, but we actually consider global as well. An example, you might consider the China-America relationship. How would that be a factor? Again, another factor that we're actually going through at the moment is the virus that we're going through. Has that a global impact? Is that a political or governmental and legal forces? Yes, well, because there's actually government's actually taking action on that. But part of that also, just going back to a normal relationship, you might have also considered the Russian and American relationship. How's that going? And is there a conflict? And if there is, you need to put that in perspective and see if that's going to be a threat or opportunity for you. Government budgets. So some budgets gets released by certain governments at certain times. Would that be an opportunity for you to take that on board? So these are all items that you need to consider when it comes to political. And obviously you need to be very aware of these laws. So the government might change the laws suddenly. You need to be aware of that. Or you may actually have someone specifically searching every 6 months or a year of the new laws that's been released by the government. The next slide, which is slide number 18, talks about the technological forces. And this is very important because, as you know, we live in a time at the moment where technology has a major impact. And as an example, imagine now, and I'm sure that you're probably facing this, is that how AI affecting your industry or may affect your industry in the next year or 2 or 5. That's something that you may actually consider. So you always got to look back where how technology will affect your industry itself. Example, AI, but just beside AI, consider also softwares. What programs that you can actually utilize. What other technologies that you can actually enhance in your organization. Okay, that can actually increase your profits for your organization. Now, these are on slide number 19. Now, this is some examples of how technology will affect a lot of industries, such as airlines. And it states here that many airlines now actually offer wireless technology in flights. Vehicles, a lot of the vehicles actually are wireless, okay? Obviously, electrical wireless cars, bankings, you don't have to go to a bank. You can do everything from your computer or laptop or a smartphone. Education, again, an example of that, we providing a lecture now, and you're actually listening that at home, at your leisure, or you're listening that in the car. Okay, that's part of technology. And again, that gets uploaded on YouTube or a website, and you can listen to that as long as you may actually have internet. Healthcare. Now, again, a lot of doctors might be replaced by AI, as an example. Hotels, and so on. So even publishing books, a lot of the books now is going e-books rather than you actually have your hard books. So all these impacts that will actually impact the industries financially, would that be considered as an opportunity or a threat? And if it is considered as a threat, then what strategies would you put in place to overcome that? Maybe commence a new product or new service. So that's something to consider. Our next slide is actually slide number 20, which talks about your competitive forces. Now, collecting and evaluating information on competitors is essential for successful strategy formulation. Now, it's a very important part of your research is you got to determine what your competitors are doing. What strategies are they taking? And this is a very important point because you may actually be taking the wrong strategy, or they might be doing a strategy that you weren't aware of. So I would highly recommend to research the most successful organizations, seeing what strategies they're actually conducting and how they're actually conducting those strategies. So, and how they're actually taking and what strategies they're taking with the challenges, with the threats that you might be facing at the moment. Okay, and that could be taking in place as well. So key questions about competitors. What are the strengths, weaknesses, okay, that you need to consider? What strategies they're taking, how they're overcoming the threats, and how they're actually overcoming the weaknesses. So these are the questions that I've put 12 questions there for you that you may actually ask when you're conducting your research. Now, sometimes it's very hard going to your competitor and trying to determine that, but there's ways of conducting that. Now, you can see the market they're going into from either from the websites. You can even have someone that you're actually working from that organization that you may know, either through social media that you can actually get some information off, LinkedIn, articles that have been actually written. So there's all the information that you can actually take on board and analyze and see how they're actually conducting their own strategies. The next thing that I would like to outline is what we call the Porter 5 Forces of Competitive Framework. Now, this is a good tool to use because it talks about the middle section itself. This is actually on slide number 22, which is the rivalry among competing firms, which is basically talks about all the competing organization, including yours, okay? And the threats that talks about from the others, such as from your having a substitute product, or from your new competitors, or actually from your bargaining power of your customers, or bargaining power of your suppliers. So this is a very good tool to analyze your forces itself, and I would like to just go through a bit of information on that. So on slide number 23, so the purpose of actually using Porter 5 Force model is to determine the market attractiveness. That's really the main purpose of using this tool. Potential entry of new competitors. Say for example, you may have a new competitor, such as for example, a company from China coming with a similar product. How would you overcome that? Okay, potential development of substitute of product. Say for example, you're selling motorcycles and a new product coming out, example like electrical bikes. Now, what the impact that it may cause your organization from the sales perspective. Now, the other perspective that you need to consider is actually the bargaining power of customers. So if you have exclusive product, it won't affect you. However, if not, then the customer will have actually an upper hand itself, because they will say, you know what, I'm going to buy the product from another supplier. Again, bargaining power of suppliers. So many suppliers at the moment, when I'm actually buying a product from a supplier to make my final product, if I have, for example, one or two who specifically sell that particular product, I don't have the upper hand. But if I have, for example, 10 or 15 suppliers, then I actually have the upper hand where I can actually have a bargaining power with prices, deliveries, and even actually on the product itself. So these are all points that you need to consider with this model itself. So the next slide talks about an example of the 5 forces, and you're talking about here the current situation. So you've got your rivalry among competitors is very, very high. However, in the near future, it's even higher. Threats from new entrants, say for example, a client from overseas, it currently is actually high. In the near future, it's still high. Okay, and when you actually outline the current situation and your near future, it gives you a very good view of, okay, well, which are really important and what you're going to take. So out of the list here that I've got, it shows to me that the first item, where you got your rivalry among competitors, higher now and higher in the near future, is very important, and I would need to make sure that I have a strategy relating to that specific fact. Now, you need to also provide a conclusion when using this analysis. So an example. So this is an attractive market I'm going to go into because this and this factor. Or you may have a different conclusion that this is not an attractive market, okay? Or this is an attractive market only for established players, as an example. So what you need to be aware of is that once you've actually completed the model itself, you need to have a conclusion, is this really an attractive market to enter or not? And that's what really the Porter David will get you to achieve. Now, the next tool that I would like to outline is called External Factor Evaluation Matrix, which is the EFE. Okay, so the EFE matrix allows strategists to summarize and evaluate economic, social, cultural, and demographic, environmental, and political, government, and legal, technology, competitive information. So basically what it does is that all your external factors that relates to the PESTEL itself, you can actually also analyze using the EFE. Okay, now the next slide I would like you to have a look at that one, because this is a really important matrix, and I'm going to give you just a few seconds just to get the slide out, and I would like you to show you a few important points. Now, this is a matrix that you would need to produce. Now you'll see that the first, on the left hand section, list 7 opportunities and list another approximately 7 threats. Now the next column, which is the first column, talks about the weight, and then the second column talks about the rating, and then the third column talks about the weighted score itself. Now, very important that the opportunities and the threats from the first column with the weight, they all need to have a sum of 1. So you can see, for example, the first one from an opportunity point of view, Rowan countries growing 8% annually in population. Now, they put a weight here of 0.05. Now, the higher the weight, the more important it is. Now, when you're actually conducting this particular matrix, I would highly recommend liaising with your colleagues, especially who's in management, and brainstorming, because these weights will make a difference when you're actually doing your weighted score in the end. So, as an example, we gave this one as a 0.05. Now, the next column is called the rating itself. The rating itself here is actually 3. The maximum you can actually give is 4. So, which is basically 3 or 4 is actually very, very important. And then what you do is actually you multiply the weight by the rating, and you get your weighted score. So 0.5 times 3 is 0.15. Okay. Now, once you've done that, you'll have a total, if you look at your weighted score, right to the end, you'll see a figure of 2.58. Okay, now what does that mean? So if you go to our slides, next slide itself, it talks about how to obviously calculate that and how to interpret the results. Now, the step number 1, obviously you list all your external opportunities and threats. That's really your first point. Second point or step is basically you need to assign each factor a weight that ranges from 0.0 to a maximum of 1. Okay. Now, you got to remember that all the opportunities and threats, they need to equal 1. So you got to make sure that you got to be very wary of what you put in, because they're all going to add up or sum to a 1. The weight indicate the relative importance of that factor. So say, for example, if we're going back to the growing of 8% annually in population, we've given it 0.05. So in that example, it didn't really show that it was actually that important. Okay. Now, it also talks about opportunities often receive higher weight than threats. However, threats can receive higher weight if they are especially severe or threatening. Now, the rule here, as it states, that basically, if you look at this, the first section, which is opportunities, which is actually as a rule of thumb that whenever you're conducting this metric, so you got to put your opportunities first, followed by the threats, is that usually the opportunities itself is actually higher. But if you look at the figures itself, you'll see the threat, which is item number 8. Have a look at that one. It talks about trend towards healthy eating and during conscious sales. They gave it 0.12. Now, you'll see this is actually the highest number in comparison to all the opportunities and the threats, which shows that is actually a major threat to the organization itself. So it shows you this is obviously, it's, you know, that people are turning into healthy food, okay, and what they're selling at the moment is not that healthy. So it may actually reduce sales dramatically. Now, the third step, which is on slide number 30, for the second column, you need to assign a rating between 1 to 4 to each of the external factor, okay, indicating how effectively the firm current strategy responds to that specific factor. So this is very important now. So 4 is the response is superior. 3, the response is above average, and 2, the response is average, and 1, the response is poor. So let's go back to our table, which is on slide number 27. You'll see that in item number 5, which talks about the 2 neighborhoods being developed within 3 miles, they gave it a 1, okay? So 1 here, the response is very, very poor. However, if you look, for example, at item number 2 from your opportunities, the university itself is expanding 6% annually, okay? They gave it 4, okay? So therefore, the university who's actually offering education and has a canteen or offering foods as well, you know, they gave that, you know, that as a 4 itself. So that's really, really important. So it's shown that it's actually expanding 6%, and it's actually taking a strong response on that, and might be actually, you know, expanding in resources, having more employees, more freelancers, etc., etc., etc. Okay, might be even you know, developing an additional university or construction, and so on. So these are all strategies that can be developed from that EFE. Now the 4th step is very important. So what you need to do basically is multiply each factor by its rating. So that's column number 1 by column number 2, and then you have your final figure. Now, what does that mean then? So you're going to have the sum of that figure. Now, very important of the interpretation itself, regardless of the number of the key opportunities and threats included in the EFE matrix, the highest possible total weight score will be 4. So it cannot be more than 4. The lowest number is 1, and the average is 2.5. So what does that mean? Basically, the total weight of score indicates that an organization is responding to an outstanding way to existing opportunities and threats. So if you achieved close to 4, say 3.3 or 3.7 or close to 4, the organization is doing very well, and it's responding, you know, really well in existing opportunities and existing threats. Okay. However, if the score is 1, okay, or 1.5 or even less, it indicates that the firm's strategies are not really taking the opportunities quite well, and it's not avoiding external threats, okay? And therefore, this is a major gap. This is a major gap for the organization, and it needs to have a strategy to really overcome that, okay? Now, if you're actually achieving 2.5, okay, that's average. Okay, that's, you know, what we call it sitting on the fence, but there's definitely room for improvement. And as you can see from the example that we've gone through, it's actually achieved 2.58. Therefore, you know, it's very close to the average, a little bit higher than the average, and therefore that I would highly recommend conducting strategies to see how we can actually utilize the opportunities and to avoid these threats for that university. So I hope that really made sense. In that table 27, you'll see some comments in red, so you'll be able to follow. And in relation also, the crucial point I just want to make sure that when you're conducting your own matrix, is that making sure that opportunities and threats, the weight itself all must come or have a sum of 1. It cannot be more or it cannot be less. Okay. Now, the weighted score cannot be more than 4, so keep that in mind as well. Okay, so if it is more than 4, it means that the first column weight itself, there's something is wrong there, or the rating itself you've used more than 4, because the maximum number you actually utilize is 4 and the lowest is 1. So you can't use 0 and you can't use 5 or 6, etc. So I hope that really made sense, and I hope that you understand how you can actually conduct an EFE matrix, which will be part of your assessment. And again, this is a very important matrix for you to evaluate, how your organization itself is really doing or is coping with these opportunities and threats. Okay. Now, I have an example from your textbook on slide number 35, which I've put that in there as well. The next matrix I would like to go through, please, is actually the competitive profile matrix, which is a CPM. So the competitive profile matrix identifies the firm's major competitors and its particular strength and weaknesses in relation to a sample firm strategic position. So this is really important. So it relates back to your competitors itself. The weight and the total weighted scores in both the CPM and EFE have the same meaning itself. So if it's 4, it's doing fantastic. If it's 1, it's really, really poor. And if it's 2.5, then that's the average. The critical success factor in the CPM include both internal and external issues. Now, I would like you to pay a little bit of attention now. This is slide number 37. So the rating refers to the strengths and weaknesses. Now, 4 is a major strength. 3 is a minor strength. However, 2 is a minor weaknesses, and then 1 is a major weakness. So this is a different comparison to what we use with the EFE. So just remember the rating here is with the CPM is different than our previous matrix itself. So please making sure that you're fully aware of that. Now, we have an example for you on slide number 38. And this is actually on your textbook, which is table 3.13 in chapter 3. So in this example, there are 2 most important factors to being successful in the industry: advertising and global expansion. Now, as indicated by the weights of 0.20. If you look here on this example, if there were no weight column, so if you have a look in examples on for example, on slide number 39, you'll see the first item itself is advertising, and then you got a weight, then you have a rating, okay, and you have a rating from company number 1, company number 2, and company number 3, which are your competitors itself, okay. Now, you'll see here that the company 1 is the strongest on product quality, and it indicates by a rating of 4, whereas company 2 is strongest on advertising. However, the overall company 1 is strongest as indicated by the total weight score of 3.15. So you'll see here that by conducting this CPM, you'll be able to analyze which company is your strongest competitor in relation to your critical success factors. And these could be differ from company to company, but what I've got here as an example is they've got advertising, they've got product quality, they've got price competitiveness, they've got management, financial position, they've got customer loyalty, they've also got global expansion, and also got market share. So each item, they've got a weight, and the total weight again has a 1. They'll put the rating itself, okay, and the rating itself, they differ from one company to the other, and you'll see that basically company number 1 has the highest, which is 3.15. I hope that made sense with the two main metrics that we actually spoke about. And then I said, I do emphasize that you really need to understand the EFE matrix and the CPM matrix. I did provide details in the slides, so you can go back to that, and also your textbooks also as a reference. Thank you very much, and we'll proceed with chapter number 4 in our next session. Take care.